Hey everyone, my name's Chris Gannon. I'm the founder of Captivate Talent, and I am here with Rebecca Price, partner at Primary Ventures. How are you doing today, Rebecca?
Great. How are you?
Uh, I'm doing fantastic. It's good to catch up with you again. And today we're going to talk about all things early stage hiring, remote teams, startup culture. So we're going to have a lot to get to, but I wanted to dive into a big topic that we get and talk about remote hiring first. And I wanted to hear what your view was. Um, do you have any recommendations between remote hiring or in person or hybrid for early stage companies?
Yeah. Well, first, maybe I'll give just the 60 seconds of my background so anyone reading or listening has the context of where this advice is coming from. So I've been in the HR and talent space for 20 years, so that definitely shows my age. I would say the three chapters to my career, the first was in corporate America, where I held
Mhm.
people and talent roles at Johnson and Johnson. There, I actually was in a HR rotational program. So over my 8 or 9 years there, saw all different functions of the HR space at scale, which was great. And I always like to say it was the best boot camp before going into
Yep.
tech, where you have to be mile wide and inch deep and run a run a team with limited resources. In 2013, made the move into the tech space, and from 2013 to 2020, held three different chief people officer roles in tech, and each of them were very different, different stage, culture, function, product. Um, and all of that led to the role that I have now and have had for the past 3 years, which is a partner at Primary. I don't spend my time doing investments. I spend the majority of my time uh, in teams side by side with founders, helping them build companies. So if you think of a seed stage company, Primary invests in pre-seed and
Yep.
seed, they need to hire teams. And that Series A fundraise is all going to be around team quality, both who's on the
Yep.
team today and their ability to recruit and hire with the capital that they're looking to raise. And so I spend my time thinking about org design, people leadership, and getting the right people in role for those companies. And there's about 100 companies in the portfolio, so never a shortage
I
of.
would you I have a kind of theory that no matter how good the product is, if you don't have the right people in place, it doesn't matter and it's never going to get off the ground. Do you kind of agree with that a little bit?
I think I would say two things. I think first, I would say everything's a people problem. So no matter how much you scale, if an organization has a problem, it's usually a people problem. But I would also say that great, I would rather invest in great people. Like if the product and market isn't there and the people
Yeah,
aren't there, the you'll never be able the best team isn't going to be able to force a great product or market.
of course.
uh, so you obviously have to have something to sell, but you've seen great companies fail because they don't have the right people or culture in place.
Absolutely. Um, one of the questions we get from founders all the time is about remote hiring.
Yeah.
We've gone through the last couple of years and everyone's a little bit back and forth, and there seems to be almost a riff in the space. So, for early stage companies, I mean, what's kind of your recommendation on thought versus remote, in person, hybrid?
Yeah, I think you just have to be consistent. Where I think it fails is when you have certain people on a team all together and then certain people on that same team remote. That actually can create a subdivide of culture and asymmetrical information. The healthiest organizations are the ones that have alignment, and alignment comes from real clarity of what work we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we work together. And if you have certain people together and certain people remote, there's going to be more information and stronger relationships with the people who are all together. So if you want a team that's fully distributed, there's tons of merit and pros, and we can dive into what those are. I would just encourage you to be consistent. But if you're going to have certain people in place, I would encourage you to build a culture and comms around people being in place. Now, I think COVID showed us that we could probably make anything work. So I'm not here to say that if anyone reading or listening is like, oh, well, my company is different and we're successful. There's lots of ways to be successful. It's harder. It's harder if and by harder I mean that you really have to be intentional around leadership, communication, feedback, building relationships, building remote relationships, and really building building trust.
What do you actually do? Like, what do you think are some of the cons of remote working and distributed workforces?
So in early teams, things are moving so quickly, and you're just constrained. You're resource constrained in terms of you never have enough people, you never have the right people, you never
Yeah,
have enough money, you never have enough time, right? That's just the nature of being an early stage company. Um, and so you're adding a barrier if you're not together because conversations, decisions that need to move quickly are now having to be happening rather than like that ad hoc where you can just turn to your neighbor and have a conversation. There's a barrier, right? I've seen like some teams, especially like during COVID, they would just keep a Zoom open all day as if like
yeah.
they're sitting next to each other. And maybe it means they're talking, maybe it means they're not, but you've reduced the barrier to ask that question or get feedback, which can then have more creativity and innovation when you can have that interaction. So again, it's not impossible. And I think the boom of COVID showed us that a lot of innovation in companies can happen being fully distributed. There's just an added barrier of building that relationship. If any of you know the concept of the performance triangle, so often we focus on results, but results is actually the last thing a leader needs to do.
Yeah.
They're building a team. They first need to focus on the bottom layer, which is trust. Only when you have trust can you have conflict. And just by conflict, I mean like disagreement. And you can only have healthy disagreement once there's trust. And then disagreement leads to clarity, clarity leads to alignment, and then alignment leads to results. So you have to build all those pieces before you can have results. And if we're not all in the same space, you have to be really intentional around, okay, how are we going to build trust? So much trust that we can have disagreement when we're not all together all the time.
I know Primary has a pretty distributed portfolio from a
Yeah.
location perspective. Like, do you think there are any locations that offer a true advantage or disadvantage, if they are thinking about that hybrid or in-person model?
So Primary was founded on being focused on New York City. So we are more distributed in New York. For every company outside of New York, it's because it's in a specialization that's aligned to our
Yep.
investment thesis. So we do invest in 5 areas of specialization: the industrials, built world, fintech, healthcare, and AI infrastructure. So that would be how we're organized. Um, I I think if you're going to build a team of in person, there needs to be like some sort of reason you're in a city, right? There's certain cities, if you're outside sort of
Yep.
the big tech hubs, you can oftentimes find great talent based on the universities that are there, the other companies that are there, right? Like people who've innovated in that place before. Like I was just talking to our fintech investor, and she was talking about Georgia Tech in Atlanta and how that's a resource hub for
Yeah.
fintech talent because of just kind of the legacy tech and talent down there, right? So you just be intentional. You're probably gonna get sick of me hearing that, but if you're gonna pick a city, like make sure that there's a reason. I'll give you one more example. We have a company that is building in the bioreactor space for the future of cultivated
Well,
meats, and there's very few people in the world who have the scientific background to do what he needed the CTO to do. So he said, I will literally build a hub wherever I find this person. And there's only 200 in the world. He found someone in the Midwest, and that's where they have a team, right? So there was a reason he went there. He wouldn't just have randomly done that.
yeah, I think we probably both would agree that, go where the talent goes. And if, you want to get your fintech off the ground and you're in St. Petersburg, Florida, maybe you should reconsider where you're going to
Yeah,
build that company
yeah,
and change your lifestyle a bit.
yeah.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts about, do you think the remote culture has made an impact on more of what we call the junior workforce or workforce that's in the earlier part of their career? Do you think that almost to a detriment has happened there?
Um, I can only speak from my personal experience, and there's the what we do, and then there's the how we do it. And I think when
Yep.
you're first entering the workforce, you're learning both those things. You're building skills rapidly, but you're also learning how to
Yep.
work. And research shows that the ways adults learn are through these like the 3 E's: education, experience, exposure. And so again, if you're in a remote environment, and all the your team and your management and your mentors are all in other locations, again, it's about being intentional. Okay, how am I going to get experience that I might not normally get in my day to day? How am I going to get exposed to those stretch opportunities? How am I going to get like the education
Yeah.
to learn something new, the shadowing and reverse shadowing that is required to build skills? So again, it's not impossible, um, but there's just something about putting your eyes on someone and being like, "Hey, what are you up to?" Or "What's that meeting about?" Or "Can I shadow you?" Or "Can you shadow me?" Or "Can you take a look at it?" Just
Yep.
decreases the formality that when you're in person, you could like grab a more senior person on the team and be like, "Can I grab you for a few minutes?" I think there's also the socialization. I think there's
Yeah.
like a mental health crisis happening in America, and there is something about spending time at work where that is socially and mentally really healthy, to interact with other humans, to have friendships at work. People show job satisfaction and
Yep.
engagement happens if you have just one friend at work. And again, like when you're remote, it can feel alone and isolating. And if the nature of your work isn't interactive, it's more like maybe you're a writer or a
Yeah.
coder and you're spending time alone, like that can just have other impacts. Maybe that's not necessarily directly to your professional career, but just on your well-being.
I think that's like kind of a good segue to maybe double click a little bit on culture because remote was kind of the necessary thing, and then almost it seems like the easier thing because a lot of founders would say, "Oh, we don't have to pay for an office, and then we don't really have to pay for all these cultural things, and if they're in the office, it costs me a couple $100 every time we do something." So, what are a few pieces of advice you would give an early stage founder on instilling a strong culture with a
Yeah,
small team?
I would say there's no shortcuts.
Yeah.
So if you're not spending money on that, it's like if it's not a little bit every day, it's a lot in these spiked moments. Because the companies that are building in a more distributed remote fashion with the strongest cultures are the ones that are intentionally designing gatherings. And there's a great book that I would encourage anyone who's really passionate about this space to read. It's called The Art of Gathering or Why We Gather. Um, and it's all about building communities. And you'll need to invest in that. So if you're not having an office space or those small ways of gathering, you need to think about in some sort of maybe quarterly or biannual way of a bigger opportunity for people to get together.
How we hear sometimes often in a hiring process about culture fit.
Yeah,
Oh, it wasn't a culture fit, and sometimes I think it's an easy out.
yeah.
Somebody just didn't like somebody, but how important do you think culture fit is in an early stage hiring decision?
Yeah, that term has gotten it's just become so overused, and I think
Yeah.
it can be weaponized actually
Yep.
to um diminish kind of diversity. So I would just caution people for using that. And what we try to do is encourage people to be very competency based. So rather than say it's not a culture
Mhm.
fit, define successful traits of people in your company. Are you a very collaborative team? Are you a very transparent culture? Are you a team that's very like competitive in terms of wanting to win? Are you a team that is kind of ruthlessly kind of candid and confrontational in like a way? Like you just have to define what the
Yeah.
differentiated traits are of people who are successful in your organization and then look for patterns of people's history to either say like, oh, their past behaviors show me that they could fit in and be successful at this culture or not. So just kind of push yourself to define
Uh,
what traits and competencies someone has to make them be a good fit.
do you think there's any really big red flags that early stage founders should watch out for from a cultural perspective when hiring?
So in the early stage, like we talked about earlier, you're always resource constrained. Right? You don't you and I've been a chief people officer enough to like one of the biggest complaints I got as an early stage chief people officer is we don't have enough people. And I always
Yep.
say like that is actually a good sign. Let me explain why. Because as soon as we have enough people, it means our company is not growing anymore. And so while it can be challenging to feel under-resourced, it also is a healthy sign that the company is continuing to grow. And so it's a reminder that you need to be focused on the right things and you need to be really efficient, like work smarter, not harder kind of thing. And um, if you can keep that in mind as an early stage company, it's like, there's no like silver bullet of like, oh, as soon as we have this money, or as soon as we have these people, or as soon as we have these customers, there's always more. Tomorrow is always a bigger day than today because we're
Yeah.
growing. So just knowing that as the baseline, I think my best advice is to hire people who thrive in that environment. They don't
Yeah.
need tons of resources. They know how to figure things out. They're comfortable in ambiguity. They are comfortable being scrappy. They have a history of being able to like solve problems, figure it out, make minimally viable products, do 0 to 1. Like, those, some people are great at that and some people aren't. And it's no shame if you're not. I always used to say to people, like, I spent my first part of my career in corporate America. Like, there's a people spend decades there and are really successful, and they're great places to work. But you do have more resources and things move more slowly. It's like a reason why when you go to a grocery store, there's so many different types of cereal, right? Like, not everyone has to like the same thing. But if you're hiring an early stage startup, if you're looking for someone who came from corporate America, I would love to see places and times that they had to build something from scratch. They had minimal resources. They didn't have the answer. And they really enjoyed just like figuring it out.
I think what you said there about if there's enough people, you're not growing. That's not only advice to founders, but that's advice to like people out there that want to join a startup. Like that's the expectation. That's your threshold that you should be operating in, where this is what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what advice would you give a founder to, core values are really important and defining culture and core values is really important. How would they go about effectively setting those and defining those?
Yeah, I love that question. I actually run a 10-week class at Primary for all of our founders of our newest investments, and we spend a whole session before values, because there's something really important you need to do before you figure out your values, which is like, who am I? I have to figure out the who am I before I can figure out the who are we. And what I mean by that is every leader, every person has things that they already intrinsically value. And the way to figure that out is, I always ask leaders to run through a series of questions of like, think about the time you were the best version of your professional self, right? Like, what traits showed up? What traits when you were like kind of the worst version of your professional self? If you were like on a team where like you struggled, like, why was that? What was it about that team? How do you act under stress? Like, what traits come
Yep.
out? How do you make decisions? Do you ask a lot of people? Do you do a bunch of research? Do you
Yep.
retreat and go in, on your own, right? All these questions are about how we work. And actually, I have, and I can share it with a resource afterwards called a user manual that everyone at Primary completes this. It's kind of like all these questions about who am I? And I encourage leaders, CEOs to answer these questions about themselves, because that will be kind of the foundation of the company and culture that they create. Companies become the organizational embodiments of their founders. So if you are a very non-confrontational person, you're going to have a very non-confrontational culture. Now, it's not to say that like it's like you can't hire to complement, but essentially human beings look to find patterns, and if they see the leaders acting a certain way, they're going to replicate that, and that's going to be the type of team you lead, and that's going to be the decisions you made, and that's going to be how you run your meetings. So, before you create this like dream utopic culture that might be orthogonal to who you actually are, spend some time reflecting, journaling, and I'm happy to share some prompt questions to be like, who am I when I'm my best version of myself? Because that really will be the true alignment of who you are as a leader and the culture you're going to create.
I think that would be a really cool resource for
Yeah.
everyone to be able to access, and that's
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you. What so in terms of blockers or other things to watch out for when defining early stage culture, what should we be kind of on the lookout for,
Um,
or
so
types of people even?
yeah, yeah, look, I'll be the first to say that you could make anything work. It's just a trade-off.
Yep.
So for example, I'm working with a young founder. He dropped out of Stanford and he's building a company at age 19, and he just wants people to like drive. work hard, 7 days,
Yeah.
24 hours, and some people have asked me like, isn't that bad for culture? And I was like, bad for who? Right? It's bad for the people who aren't aligned with that. It might be bad if he wants to hire people who are more experienced, and more experience might come with more like like age, which might come with like more responsibilities of like family and kids. Right? It's
Yep.
possible, but it's also possible that it could be totally fine. It just like depends. And so I always just say like be intentional, understand the trade-offs. Every strength has a weakness. There's a dark side
Yep.
to every strength. Um, and just know what that is. Go in with eyes open. Take the trade-off. Um, when I worked at Enigma, I worked with one head of engineering who came from kind of the like bigger tech companies, and he loved
Yep.
clarity and transparency into engineering leveling. Engineer, senior engineer, lead, right, director, right? And we had lots of competencies defined and people were tracked against them. That worked great. When he left, a new head of engineering came, and he came from Palantir, and he was like, no more titles. There's so much noise about what level am I? What level am I going to be? Where am I tracking? What's my feedback? When's my next promotion? He was like, everyone needs to focus and get to work. And so the pendulum swung the other way, and we transitioned to every engineer just being engineer. And then when he left and another head of engineering came, we kind of settled back to we're going to have titles, but we're going to have like focus time around career conversation.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you can make anything work. There's just trade-offs, and it's just understanding what you're getting and what you're giving up with each decision.
I'm curious. So once you've done all this work and you defined your culture and you figured it out, how do you codify it and like put it into practice? And where does it almost live, or how does it live? I mean, I think a
Yeah.
lot of people have values, but they're just like somewhere on the website.
Yeah, so um actually, if you break it down to like it's like micro moment, it's just how person A interacts with person B. And it's like sometimes those can be great and sometimes they can be against the values. So it is hard. And I will say the reason why I feel so passionately about values naturally aligning to who leadership already is because when the job is hard. Building these companies is hard. Leading these companies is hard. You're going to have a million things coming at you. You can't be second guessing or thinking, oh, yeah, wait, how would I do this if I was aligned to our values? If it's naturally already
Yeah.
coming from you, the leader, the CEO will naturally lead in that way, which then sets the standard. Humans always look to find what are the rules of being successful in this system. That's just how our brains work. It's like how evolution has worked. And so the leader has to carry the water. It is not like an HR job. It is
Yep.
not. It is the CEO, and then the CEO sets the standard at the executive team. And I love the book called The Advantage, which is about first team principles. The leadership team is like that first team, and they need to align and realign and reinforce that alignment and clarity on a regular basis, quarterly or semi-annually, around like who are we? How do we agree? How do we make decisions? How do we disagree? Where are we in terms of our alignment around
Yeah.
not just what work we're doing, but how we work. So you're always kind of reinforcing each other on that. And you're setting the example for the rest of the organization. If the leadership team is really healthy, you've hedged your bets that the rest of the org will. And then it comes into hiring, perform like good hiring and assessment. So question banks aligned to values,
Yeah. Yeah.
managers being good at managers and holding people accountable to values, and recognizing when someone's, for lack of a better word, like toxic or against culture, and being quick about it. I
Yeah.
saw some research study recently. I have to look up the exact stat, but it was basically like a toxic employee who's high performing does less for the bottom line than, did you see that? Yeah, then,
I saw the same. They suck up more money and resources at the end of
yeah,
the day than they're actually
exactly,
worth, and it was
exactly.
all about. It's like firing your high sales performers that you let be toxic.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Oh, actually, that's kind of what our next topic, and I wanted to talk to you about was hiring early go-to-market employees. Um, I know you have a lot of thoughts around when a founder should hire their first go-to-market
Yeah,
employee, especially a
yeah,
technical founder. I'd love to hear what you think
yeah.
on that.
Yeah, so the reason I love talking about the go-to-market hire is because the competencies required in terms of being able to sell are competencies that every CEO needs. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is the job of a CEO is ultimately selling. So I always talk about the job description of a CEO is MVP. You need to make sure there's money in the bank. You need to make sure there's vision that's clear, and you need to make sure you have the right people. And the way that you raise money, the way you pitch a vision, and the way you recruit is all about selling. And so if you are reading this or listening and you want to be a founder and you want to be a CEO and you don't know how to sell, you better build that competency first. And so the reason that's so important when it comes to go to market hiring is founders, particularly technical founders, might feel insecure about their ability to sell. And they might be
Yep.
like, oh, I have to I have to bring in a salesperson to do this job. When the reality is you need to be able to sell your product. When you're an early team in an early company, a customer is putting sometimes their job on the line to say, hey, they have to go to their boss and say, hey, buy this. We have to buy this product and they're getting approvals, right? And they're putting their reputation on the line. They have to believe in you. They have to believe in you as the CEO that we should commit this budget and buy this product that might not be as
Yep.
advanced as another product, right? And they're believing in the CEO that the CEO of this tech company really can build the vision and deliver on the promise of it. You also learn a ton about your customer, a ton about your market, and you're actually a better
Okay.
product leader, technical leader when you understand the pain points of your customer. You have to love your customer and your customer's problems more than you love your tech.
Do you think there's any like key metric or milestone or types of metrics and milestones that founders should really pay attention to before they say, okay, now it's
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, so if you, in founder-led sales, and actually there's people at Primary who are way better and more knowledgeable about this around founder-led sales. Um, there's comes a point probably around generically speaking in SaaS, 1 million of ARR. Like that's sort of like the magic number.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that founder CEO has to be doing everything end to end before
Yep.
that. You can hire around you to make sure that all the sales ops, all the prep, like a chief of staff role can be really helpful. A BDR could be really helpful.
Yep.
Um, but you're always gonna have to be that first pitch. You're always gonna have to be a closer, yeah, for a long time.
Yeah, I think sometimes you see a founder they want to hire this like magical VP of sales at like 800K and they think they're just never going to have to do sales again. And it's almost like a easy out. It's like an excuse almost to get away from it
Yeah.
versus
And I wouldn't hire a
there
VP
you
of
go.
sales would not be my first hire. I would, if I'm a founder and I'm running sales and I'm doing sales and I understand I have enough pipeline coverage, I'm going to bring in an AE to kind of own the middle chunky section. I'll do the pitch, they'll kind of run the middle section, and I'll come in and close. A VP of sales is really only when you need to like have management of AEs and you can't have multi direct reports.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you next is like what types of roles should they prioritize in those first few hires aside
Yeah.
from the CRO right out of the gate?
Yeah. So, I would think about you're going to learn a lot in your sales motion in those early days, and you're going to really see where the volume is so heavy that you need to offload. And so it just depends on what type of sale you have, and what type of like of outbound you're doing. Um, but I think generating pipeline coverage is like the first real role. And so depending on how that's happening, if it's coming from more marketing or if it's coming from BDR, if it's coming from the founders.
Yep.
The second then is who's kind of running end to end. And so then you're thinking about, okay, we have so much pipeline coverage that the founders can't handle it. We need to offload it. So then you're going to bring on someone more senior. And you're going to watch that for a bit and kind of really understand your pipeline metrics, where how things come into the funnel and where they fall out and how you close. From there, it's just going to really inform your next hires. But you need to kind of understand also. It's almost impossible for me to give this advice because it's really the dynamic of who your customer, who your buyer is, the
Hmm.
strength of the people on the team, and your go to market motion, where people are coming into your funnel.
Yeah, I think it's a good disclaimer for anyone reading or listening that this is not prescriptive. Analyze
Yes.
your own company, understand where you are, and make a decision. Don't just read a blog and then make a decision after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about like, have you ever seen situations where they've waited too long to make those first go-to-market hires, or like what should a founder watch out for signals that they should see in their business where, hey, you needed somebody like a couple months ago?
Yeah, I think it's when you're leaving like, low hanging fruit or fruit, or like we like to say, like fruit on the floor, right? Like you just missed opportunities. You had so much demand, you had so much pipeline, you just did not have enough people. Couldn't return emails, couldn't return calls, couldn't follow up, right? That's an awesome problem. Obviously you don't want to miss out on it, but it's great when you have so much demand and not enough people to cover it. I think like just going back to your last point, around the disclaimer, I like to always recommend an org design exercise. So it's so easy to be in the
Yep.
weeds and reactive of like, what do I need to do today? What do I need to do tomorrow just to survive? But there is an opportunity to work with someone, and ideally it's someone like who's a little bit outside the organization because they can be really objective to think about, okay, in 12 months from now, how will like if we are wildly successful, how will we know? And there's usually a metric around revenue, there's a metric around your product and tech, and there's some sort of like G&A, maybe like it's like a fundraise or something. And if you can quantify what those metrics are, then you take, okay, who today at the organization owns each of those numbers? Do we have enough competencies to
Yep.
meet that gap? And if you don't, that becomes your talent plan. And there's like a build or buy. Build, it's like we have the people internally, but they need to kind of grow
Yeah.
and step in, or buy, which is like we need to recruit. But if you don't do that org design planning, then ultimately I think you're left in the position you just talked about, Chris, which is, oh my gosh, we waited too long.
Yeah. We lost revenue. We lost
We lost.
money. We lost deals. What about, so we're really big on help founders with process because many of them haven't done this before. What are some process recommendations or tips you can give like a founder hiring their first go-to-market employees or employees in general?
Yeah. Um, so I've already recommended two books, one on gathering and one on the advantage. I swear I'm not a book person, but like the third book I would recommend is about hiring, and the book is called Who. And it lays out a framework that has really become the go-to resource that I continue to rely on in terms of hiring. And what the book says is rather than anchoring recruiting into a job title or
Yeah.
anchoring it around a person, you anchor it around outcomes. So if
Yep.
this person were to start today and in a year from now exceeded expectations, what would be different? What would have been delivered? What would have been built? How will we measure it? And you take those outcomes and you translate that into competencies. What competencies does someone need to have to deliver those outcomes? And then the third step, once you have competencies, is what could I look at on someone's resume to show me that to be clues that they might have those competencies? Then when you meet people, you're rooted in a very data driven recruiting or assessment process where you're asking questions aligned to those competencies. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So I'm just going to ask a lot of questions about people's past job where they've demonstrated those competencies. And I'm going to rate every person against a consistent set of competencies and every person only against the competencies rather than against other candidates. And you have a very clear
Yeah.
scorecard, you have very clear competencies, you have very clear questions, you have
Yep.
panelists aligned, and you're repeating the same process for every candidate in that role. And you should have a good outcome if you stay true and pure to the process. The other thing that we like to do at Primary, which is not uncommon in go-to-market hires, is some sort of like actual like practice. We call them stand and delivers. Some sort of final presentation where if the interviews have all gone well, you ask them to do one final presentation. And in a sales or go-to-market role, it could be like an actual like mock call where they are actually selling and there's objection handling and you see how they do display all those competencies in the medic.
Yeah, we try so hard to like not let a job be designed around a title. Like, oh, we need to hire this, and then they're just gonna. It's you have to reverse engineer from like what the company needs, and then build off of that. And then you have to also realize like if that person that you're trying to build all these outcomes off of like actually exists, or if it's a real job, or you just
Yeah,
made one up. So that's I
totally.
think something to watch out for too, and driving
Totally.
scorecards and processes and building questions off of competencies is so important.
Yeah.
Um,
Wait, can I just say one thing
just
on that?
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah, like because obviously, like the unicorn hire is something that can be ambitious and you can get yourself stuck. If you have time or and if you have a network, I just recommend talking to people who you believe are already in a similar role and validating your hypothesis. So be like, "Do you have 10 minutes to talk to me? Like I'm not looking to recruit you, but I am looking just to like information gather and ask people, "Hey, you're in a role that I think I need to hire for my team. What were your skills coming into that job? What were your experiences? What do you own? How are you measured? What was your impact?" Like ask them those questions just to validate to make sure you're not making up a unicorn candidate.
Absolutely. I think testing if that person exists. And if you can't find that person in your network, either A, you need to have a better network, or B, maybe they don't actually exist. Um, what
Yeah.
about we get I just have like two more questions for you. One's around salaries and equity at an early stage. I mean,
Yep.
so often we get, well, we're early stage, so we're going to give them an equity, and it's like selling the dream, but
Yeah.
it's really, it sounds like it's almost maybe an excuse for paying 20% below market rate. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah.
Or do you disagree with that or disagree with that?
Um, so market rate is it's a tricky word because not all markets are the same. Both you have both geography and stage. But I am a firm believer that if you're hiring someone at like a seed stage company, you should pay them like in like a seeds like other seed stage companies do. I do not believe in underpaying at all. But I also think that like if you need big secure cash and you need to be more than sort of 50th percentile cash, um, then working at a startup just might not be for you, and that's okay. Like the different life stages require different things. Um, and you can go make great money in corporate America. Just it's just a different job, right? So there has to be like an emotional reason that brings someone into a startup. They have to like want to do that work. And then I believe you pay at the 50th or 75th percentile, never below the 50th percentile for other seed stage companies. I also think like you're also in it because there's overselling the dream and there is just like selling and believing in the dream. If you're going to take a leap into a startup, you do have to drink some of the Kool-Aid, right?
Yep.
And you do have to believe there's a there. Um, and believe that there's a promised land of like, I believe the world needs this product. I believe in the vision that this founder has laid out for me or laid out for this product. And I believe that with this product built in this way and this vision, we can really grow the company. Um, I've worked for three startups. I'm still waiting for my equity payout, right? So like it's hard and it's not a lot of people necessarily get paid out, but um, you do have to believe in the beginning.
Yeah, but I think that's like so important for founders to think about how important they are in every stage of the interview process. Like to even approach that first screen with like excitement. Like you don't have to like just pass everyone through and be a cheerleader, but you
Yeah,
have to be selling even when you're interviewing. Like
absolutely.
yeah, it always has to be happening.
Absolutely. The advice I give every founder, particularly early stage founders, is you are selling in that first call. That first call needs to be at least 50-50, if not more. You're selling. You are earning the right for a second call. They don't know you, they don't know your company, they don't know your product. And so you are just earning your right for a second call. And that first call, you need to sell the vision of the company, but you also are selling yourself. Why should this person risk the next chapter of their career on you, on your company, on your vision? And then there's a couple questions just to one, make sure they say who they say they are,
Of
like on
course.
their resume, and that there's no kind of blatant red flags, maybe around communication or leadership or value style. And then it really is, if you can earn that second call is really where you assess.
I think I need that clip of you to just follow me on calls with founders and just watch this real quick before we start.
And that
Any
first call, 15 minutes. That first call can just literally be 15 minutes. You have 15 minutes. I just want to share with you what we're building. And if you're interested, we can grab more time. And if you're not, cool. you know?
And and look, if you don't have a lot of time as a founder, I think you just have to be really careful about who you get on that call and make sure you're not having 25 of those in a week, and maybe you're having five of those that you're excited about. So you mirror that excitement when you get on it.
Yeah, but on the flip side, early stage founders should be spending at least a third of their time recruiting. At least. The
Absolutely.
best founders I've worked with, some of the most successful companies in the primary portfolio, it is the CEOs who, through their Series A, if not B, are spending at least a third of their time, if not
Well,
more,
money, vision, people. So
recruiting.
that's a
Yeah,
third of it, right? There we go.
exactly. So when I hear like, well, we don't have time, it's like, well, we have to make time. We have to.
Um, any recommendations for how founders can effectively scale themselves? Like anything that tips, tricks, outside resources?
Um, I think it gets back sometimes to that self-awareness activities that we talked about early on, like where does your energy go and what are you really good at? And start thinking about when you build your org, hiring people who do the things that you either aren't excellent at or just really drain your energy because that's going to be a really good use. Outside of that, I think everyone needs an executive coach. I would really invest time and money there. Everyone should think about their mental health and mental wellness. And there's a lot of great resources out there. Alma is a primary company that's a great marketplace for mental health providers. But if you have a professional coach, you're taking care of your mental health and really thinking about like sleep, exercise, diet, kind of like you're a balanced person and you are surrounded by people who support you, then I think it's then just building up kind of your board of advisors and mentors, um, and knowing who you
Have
can
a
go to for what. Yeah, so you're never alone. Being a CEO, being a founder, it's a very lonely job. It's a very hard job. I've never had it. I'm empathetic to the people who have it. It's very hard. So knowing that going into it, it's kind of building and shoring up a network of people and professionals to support you.
And one last thing, since we're still in the beginning of the year, talk to me a little bit about goal setting for your team and how important that is.
Yeah. So we run our firm at Primary like an operating company, which is, I mean, I love a lot of things about Primary, but it's one of the things I love. As a firm, we have what we call glass balls. So there's a thing of a glass ball and a rubber ball. If you think of a glass ball, if you drop it, it shatters. And a rubber ball, if you drop it, it bounces. So we as a team, as a firm, are very clear of what are our glass balls, what are the things that we cannot drop, and then being very clear of who's owning those and what excellent looks like, because that has to come first. And then we have clear metrics that we're tracking monthly, but then each team ladders up into that. I love having that clarity for myself, and I love providing it for a team because not only does it drive more engagement and alignment because people know what they're supposed to do, um, but we're all driving in the same direction. So my personal team at Primary is focused on we really spend a lot of time putting placements, like actually doing
Yep.
full life cycle recruiting for our portfolio companies. I think there's been 33 or 34 working days in the year, and we've already made 16 placements. So we're pretty psyched
There we
about that.
go.
The second team underneath me is all focused around building communities aligned around the roles that early stage companies need. So we're thinking about the programming and engagement and recruiting into our communities. And then lastly, that CEO class and curriculum that I lead for our newer CEOs.
Rebecca, one final question. Is there any sales pitch for why a founder should consider primary ventures when they're ready to raise their next round?
Yeah,
Sounds like a
so
pretty easy one.
I think there's probably two, or I would say like three major reasons. One, our investment team has deep specialization. So that's not to say primary is the right fit for every founder, but if you are building a company in one of our five specializations, we are truly deep experts and deep experts who are doing the work. They're some of the smartest people I've met in my entire life work at this firm, and they're not just smart, they're extremely hardworking, curious. So the investors are pushing themselves to be really smart. Second, we're two-thirds operators to investors. So two-thirds of us, and that's the team I sit on, are all in the businesses of the companies we invest in doing the work, right? 16 hires in 33
Yep.
working days. Like we're not just connecting. Some VCs say our currency is our connections. We are actually doing the work. I run the people and talent team, but there's a mere team that's doing go to market, and then there's a mere team doing finance. We know seed stage founders need team quality, customers, and financing. And so we have teams of experts and operators who are doing that
Mhm.
work. And then lastly, we're a very people driven company firm. Like we care about founders, we care about leaders. We want to see people be successful. One, it's our fiduciary responsibility, but two, like relationships are core to our values. So
Amazing.
that's
And where do people or how do people get in touch with you and where can they learn more?
yeah, Rebecca at primary.vc. If you go to the primary.vc website, you'll see everyone on the team there organized by specialty and specialization. And we're all like our first name at primary.vc.
Awesome, Rebecca. Thank you so much. There's so much
Thank you.
here to digest, to push out. I think this has been super helpful. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, Jay.